I'm Nicole Stogren, Manager of Employer Strategies at Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity, and I have had the pleasure of overseeing the Impact COVID project. The Impact COVID project started in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and its immediate goal was to get youth working, preferably in meaningful jobs, so they had income during the pandemic. It, in the final two phases, morphed into something much larger than that, and trying to transform workforce development in Canada by addressing some of the needs of employers, service providers, and youth themselves to connect youth with meaningful employment. I think the biggest challenge that youth face when they're looking for meaningful employment is that perceived lack of skill. I think it was exacerbated and magnified by the pandemic. People are looking for more. They don't want just a paycheck, especially youth. They want to transform the world. They want to give back to their communities. That's a huge challenge for youth, to be taken seriously, to have their voices heard at the table, to impact policy, change, corporate growth, tech growth. So we worked with 7 partner organizations in Ontario and Quebec to employ thought leaders. And what they did was gather some ideas from youth, from educators, from employers, to figure out what needed to change in the workforce for youth to have a strong presence both during the pandemic and after. We held the first National Youth Summit in April of 2021, and at that Youth Summit we launched the Pandemic Recovery Plan and the Youth Engagement Toolkit. During phase 2, when we hired the 10 youth engagement specialists, we focused on small business because we knew that small business is the biggest employer of anyone here in Canada, but particularly youth. So focusing on small business gave them the tools to help further youth employment goals, to continue with job creation and supporting youth, especially post-pandemic. However, we all know 2021 didn't really go as planned. And we still had a lot of issues around the COVID-19 pandemic. We had second, third, fourth, fifth waves go through, at which time the problem wasn't job creation. Small businesses were really focused on just surviving that period. And what they really found is that a lot of young people who were entering the workplace who graduated during the pandemic, there was a perceived lack of skill, even a lack of knowledge around things like customer service, being able to have some of those basic social skills or navigate, some of the things many of us take for granted on how to play office politics, all the unwritten rules of the workplace, because the workplace was different. So during phase 2, we launched the first 2 of our resource hubs. In the virtual space, we partnered with Magnet and put some resources up on Magnet and some links to things such as funding opportunities, how to write youth-friendly job postings. And we also started developing some workshops that were both youth and employer focused in the beginning on things like what are employer responsibilities around workplace safety, especially in the face of COVID regulations. We learned a lot during those early workshops around marketing, around getting interest, garnering interest. One of our early consultations during phase 2 was with Landscape Ontario, in which they were talking about the fact that they had all these jobs in landscape and horticulture trades and nobody to fill them. How do we attract youth into those fields? What our team of engagement specialists came up with was some toolkits, information sheets, infographics on how to use storytelling as a tool to attract youth into sectors that they didn't think of or didn't even know existed in a lot of cases. We ran a storytelling workshop in March of 2022, which had a low participation rate, but gave us a good dry run on what activities worked in an online environment using Zoom as a webinar platform that was aimed at employers. By this time, we had morphed the name into Youth Workforce Consultancy. By this point, 2022, we kind of realized that things were forever changed in the world of work as we knew it. We knew that sectors like retail, tourism, hospitality were really booming and couldn't find enough staff. So where could we go from there? We then moved our resource hub onto the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity website as a central place to drive traffic to our own organization and give a central repository for employers and service providers alike to get those resources and toolkits. What we've done is we've created 7 toolkits for employers. They consist of webinars, self-assessments, some informational resources on how to implement different ideas into their workplace, such as storytelling, intergenerational communication, hiring immigrants, working with youth with disabilities such as mental health or neurodivergent issues, and how to make the most of the resources and talent that you have and changing your expectations. Well, during the 3 years of the project, we've done some fantastic things. We hired over 77 youth. We worked with 7 partner organizations. We hosted and participated in 2 national youth summits. We developed 7 toolkits for employers. We were able to have some workshops, mainly from December 2021 to March 2023, in which we had over 343 participants. I think that Impact COVID as a project has had not only impact for young people on a pan-Canadian scale, but also for the over 77 youth that took part directly. I think it was a beautifully organic piece that came out of this, was that we started coming up with best practices, because not only were we doing this large co-created project with the youth to come up with ways to help employers address challenges around youth employment, youth unemployment, but we also were dealing with young employees ourselves. And it was, how do we bring them up to level? How do we level them up? And I can happily say that the vast majority of the thought leaders and engagement specialists have gone on to do bigger and better things than what they were doing early on in the pandemic. And it's directly as a result of the skills that they gained while they were employed with Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity and partner organizations like MyStarter, Extra, YWCA. So one of the things that has come out of this project is recognizing the gaps between perceived lack of skills or true lack of skills. Those skill gaps we keep hearing about in the news. Things like digital skills, social skills, leadership skills, mentorship skills. And these are gaps within the workplace, and they go throughout all of the generations in the workplace. And one of those things that Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity has done and will be doing in the future is to bridge those gaps. We're a convener bringing all of the players together and coming up with creative solutions on how we can find the way through those problems and make a Canada where youth have prosperity, have financial security, and have career growth.